Sacred Heart Hospital in Norfolk smells like antiseptic and the particular exhaustion of fluorescent lights that have hummed the same frequency for 20 years. Katie Rodriguez moves through the pediatric wing with the kind of invisibility that takes decades to perfect, head down, steps measured, the soft squeak of her white shoes on linoleum barely registering as human movement. She is one of 40 nurses on this floor, and she intends to remain exactly that, unremarkable. Her scrubs hang loose enough to hide the scars that spiral around both forearms like abandoned highway maps, evidence of a life that officially ended in 2004. The long sleeves under her short sleeves, always 2 layers, always, are a choice she made once and has never reconsidered. Room for 12 sits at the end of the North Corridor, the pediatric ICU's quiet corner where the hopeful cases and the impossible ones are arranged with equal care. The blind 8-year-old boy lies in the adjustable bed with the kind of stillness that only comes from catastrophic injury and morphine, his breathing shallow and rhythmic, his small chest rising with the mechanical precision of a body that has learned to exist rather than to live. His name is Marcus Webb Jr., though no one calls him that anymore. Around his neck, partially hidden beneath hospital linens that whisper and move like they're alive, hangs a single dog tag on a broken chain. The chain is tarnished silver. The tag is dulled from 2 decades of contact with human skin. Katie sees it from the doorway and stops walking. Her hand trembles for exactly 3 seconds. Then it steadies. She has not trembled in public since 2004. She has not allowed herself to tremble since the night a lieutenant, the same lieutenant who now occupies a chair in the waiting room, his prosthetic leg rigid and unforgiving, held an infant against his chest in a collapsed field hospital in San Gin Valley while rockets tore the sky open. She had placed that dog tag around that infant's neck with hands that knew how to perform field medicine, emergency triage, and the kind of decisions that get buried in classified documents. She had whispered something she was not supposed to say to a child that was not supposed to exist in that moment. She had placed the tag and stepped back into the chaos, and 20 years had passed like a held breath. The trembling stops. Katie enters room for 12 with the mechanical competence of a routine vital signs check, her chart in one hand, her stethoscope already unpacked from around her neck. The boy's first sight is clean, the fluids running at the correct rate, the monitor above his head showing a heart rhythm that is stable but inefficient, a heart that is working very hard to remain in the game. She checks the rate, 112 beats per minute. Not critical. Not yet. She adjusts the 4 line with movements so precise they seem unusual for a pediatric floor nurse, movements that carry embedded knowledge from somewhere beyond a civilian nursing program. If anyone were watching carefully, if anyone were trained to recognize what they were seeing, they would notice that her hands move like someone who has performed these exact movements under fire, with rounds incoming, with the knowledge that the next 30 seconds determine whether someone lives or dies. But no one is watching carefully. No one is trained to recognize what they are seeing. Katie Rodriguez is just the quiet nurse with the limp and the sad eyes who works doubles and never complains. The boy's name is Marcus Webb Jr., and he will never see his father's face. Dr. Edmund Caldwell arrives for morning rounds at precisely 7:48 a.m., his white coat pristine, his tablet already glowing with quarterly metrics and success rates and the particular currency of modern medicine, insurance caps and projected outcomes and what the hospital board will see when they review the pediatric ICU's performance next quarter. He is 53 years old, chief of pediatrics at Sacred Heart for 6 years, and his reputation is built on something very specific: he knows when to withdraw care. He knows the algorithm of which cases are salvageable and which ones are not. He knows how to talk to families about the word dignity, how to frame the withdrawal of life support as an act of compassion rather than an act of triage. His quarterly presentations to the hospital board have never featured a patient death that was not, in his careful phrasing, anticipated and managed with excellence. He moves down the pediatric ICU corridor like a man who has never once questioned his own judgment, and he arrives at room for 12 with his tablet already showing the boy's file. He glances at the monitor above the bed, heart rate elevated, blood pressure compensating, organ function declining across all measured parameters. He glances at the boy himself, barely a visual acknowledgement, his eyes already moving to the chart. Then he notices Katie adjusting the 4 line with that unusual precision, and something flickers across his face, a small dismissal, the kind of expression that a man in his position reserves for people whose work he has already decided is beneath his notice. Just a nurse. Just another tired caregiver in scrubs who does not understand that some battles are already lost. Room for 12, Caldwell says, speaking to his tablet and not to Katie, 8-year-old male, IED injury secondary to paternal exposure. Blindness, cascading organ failure. Projected decline. The words fall into the room like stones into still water. Katie listens without responding, her hands continuing their work, her face arranged in the particular blankness that is her professional armor. She has been listening to doctors misread patients for 20 years. She has been watching physicians see a chart instead of a child. She has been standing in rooms while clinical decisions are made by people who have not touched the patient, have not felt the warmth still in the skin, have not noticed the small reflexive movements that suggest a body still fighting. Pain is information. A dilated pupil is data. A tremor in the fingers is a sentence in a language that only the truly careful can read. Katie reads it. She has been reading it since Helmand Province, since that night when an entire field hospital came down and she pulled a child from the rubble with blood on her hands and a dog tag in her pocket that she should never have kept. Lieutenant Marcus Webb Sr. sits in the pediatric ICU waiting room 3 rooms away, his prosthetic leg extended on the plastic chair beside him, his remaining foot planted flat on the linoleum floor. He has one arm and one leg and a face that has learned to wear pain like a familiar coat. He has been waiting for 6 days, since his son's transfer from Walter Reed, since the surgeons informed him that the shrapnel damage to his son's optical nerves was permanent, irreversible, absolute. The blindness is not the worst part. The worst part is that his son remembers the day he could see. His son is 8 years old and he remembers light, and now he will never see light again, and Marcus Webb Sr. sits in a plastic chair in a hospital waiting room in Norfolk and practices breathing because breathing is what they taught him to do when there is no tactical solution. He has not slept in 4 days. His chair is angled so that he can watch the doorway of room for 12 from a distance, so that he can see the nurses entering and leaving, so that he can calibrate their body language against what he knows about his son's condition. Most of them move with the particular sympathy of people who have seen children suffer. One of them moves differently. The nurse with the limp and the long sleeves, the one who checks his son's vitals every 2 hours, she moves with a kind of efficient precision that Marcus has seen only once before in his life, and that was in a collapsed field hospital in San Gin Valley when the sky was falling and a woman in blood-soaked scrubs pulled his infant son from the rubble and pressed a dog tag into his hand and said 4 words that he has never forgotten: his name is Marcus. He has carried that dog tag for 20 years. He mailed it 2 weeks ago to a name he found through channels that should not have been available, to an address in a state he pulled from files that were supposedly sealed. And then his son suffered an IED injury in a vehicle accident, a terrible accident, a father's terrible accident, a moment of inattention that changed everything, and his son was transferred to Sacred Heart Hospital in Norfolk, and there she was, moving through the pediatric ICU like she was part of the walls. Dr. Caldwell's tablet chimes. A message. He reads it without changing his expression, his eyes already calculating the next item on his rounds, the next patient whose chart tells a story that he has already decided is ending. He does not look at the boy's pupils. He does not notice that they are responding to light, that something deep in the brainstem is still fighting, that the clinical picture he is seeing on his tablet is already 2 days outdated. He does not notice Katie's hands, which have steadied now and are moving with the kind of competence that should raise questions. He is already moving toward the door, toward the next room, toward the next opportunity to prove that he understands something about medicine that other people do not understand. The morning rounds continue. The hospital hums. The fluorescent lights buzz their low-frequency complaint. And Katie Rodriguez returns to room for 12 at 8 o'clock, when her shift rotation brings her to the 8 to 4 span, and she stands beside the bed of a boy she pulled from rubble 20 years ago, and she sees a dog tag around his neck that she placed there herself, and she understands with absolute clarity that her old life has just entered the building. Morning rounds begin at 7:45. Katie stands at the foot of the boy's bed in room for 12, her clinical eye tracking the ventilator settings, the 4 lines, the slow decline of numbers on the monitor that everyone else has accepted as inevitable. Lieutenant Marcus Webb sits in the corner chair, unshaven, his prosthetic leg visible below cargo shorts, watching his son with the intensity of a man who has already lost everything that matters. The fluorescent lights hum their low-frequency complaint above them. Katie has been assigned to this unit for 18 hours now, and in that time she has observed something that makes her shoulders straighten and her jaw set with the kind of certainty that comes from recognizing a pattern most people miss. The boy's pupils responded to light this morning. Not once. Twice. At 0600, when she checked his vital signs, she dimmed the overhead lights and watched his pupils constrict slightly, then dilate again when brightness returned. Pupil response means brain function. Brain function means hope. The organ failure that fills his chart is real, but incomplete. There is still something fighting in there, something that refuses to lie down. Dr. Caldwell arrives at 7:52, trailing 2 residents and a nursing student who move in his wake like satellites orbiting something dense and immovable. He carries the boy's chart like a prosecutor carrying evidence of guilt. His voice has that clipped efficiency that hospital administrators love, the tone of a man who has made peace with the mathematics of triage, the cruel calculus of resource allocation and bed turnover. He reviews the vitals without looking at the patient. Oxygen saturation dropping. Kidney function at 32%. Liver markers climbing in all the wrong directions. He nods like a man confirming what he already knows. Comfort care measures only, he says. DNR status, he continues. We talked to the father this afternoon about what realistic expectations look like. Katie's hands are steady. Her voice is soft, the voice she learned to use in the nursing home where she has been invisible for 3 years. But the words that come out are not tentative. She tells him the pupils responded to light at 0600. She says it clearly, in front of the residents and the student and the father in the corner, who stops staring at his son and looks at her instead. She says neurological response indicates active brain function and that a DNR recommendation without a full neurological workup misses information that changes the clinical picture. Dr. Caldwell's jaw tightens. It is a small movement, barely visible, but Katie sees it because she has spent 20 years reading the micro-expressions of men who are about to make a decision that will define the next several hours of her life. He stands there for 3 seconds. 4. Then he turns and walks out of room for 12 without speaking. The residents exchange glances. The student looks confused. Lieutenant Webb's hands grip the armrests of his chair like he is trying to anchor something that wants to drift away. Katie continues her assessment. Temperature, heart rate, urine output. She moves through the checklist with the practiced precision of someone who has done this 10,000 times, but her mind is already 3 steps ahead, already calculating the cost of what she has just done. The page comes at 8:14. It crackles over the hospital intercom system that reaches every floor, every wing, every supply closet and break room and surgical bay. Not a call to the nurse's station. Not a text message. A page that belongs to the entire hospital. Nurse Rodriguez, rookie mistake, report to my office. The silence that follows is the kind of silence that has texture. Katie can feel it in the air around her, in the sudden absence of beeping monitors and rolling carts and the soft murmur of morning routine. A surgical attending in the hallway outside room for 12 closes his eyes like he is witnessing something he cannot unsee. A resident pretends to be very interested in a patient's chart. The nursing student's face goes pale. Katie continues her work without breaking rhythm, removing the empty 4 bag and replacing it with a full one, checking the line for bubbles, documenting the time. She does not hurry. She does not pause. She finishes what she is doing, then sets down her clipboard and walks toward the elevator. Dr. Caldwell's office is on the administrative floor. Everything here is expensive and impersonal: a mahogany desk, leather chairs, windows that overlook the city without letting anyone see in. He is waiting for her, leaning against the desk with his arms crossed, and something in his posture has shifted from merely dismissive to actively predatory. His voice drops to the surgical precision that he uses in board meetings, the tone of a man talking to someone he has already decided to destroy. Your employment file shows gaps I could drive a truck through, he says. Medical training in 2003. Then nothing until 2007. For years. Where were you, Rodriguez? Military service? Some kind of sabbatical? No documentation. No references. He pushes off from the desk and moves closer, and now she can see the calculation in his eyes, the moment he made the connection between her defensive posture and something he suspects she wants to hide. I make one call to HR about falsified credentials, he continues, his voice dropping even lower. One call. You're not just fired, Rodriguez. You're prosecuted for fraud. You understand me? Katie takes one measured breath. The fluorescent lights buzz their complaint above them. She does not look away, does not shrink, does not give him the satisfaction of fear or anger or any of the reactions he is clearly counting on. Instead, she feels something move in her chest, not trembling, but the restraint of something held very carefully in check. A single tear escapes down her cheek, the kind of tear that comes not from breaking but from the pressure of holding everything together too tightly for too long. She wipes it away without flinching, the motion economical and precise, and when she speaks, her voice is soft enough that he has to lean in to hear it. That child's pupils responded to light this morning. Something you'd have seen if you'd actually examined him instead of his insurance cap. She does not wait for his response. She turns and walks out, her hand steady, her breathing controlled, her mind already processing the next phase of what is coming. She knows, with the clarity that comes from having survived worse situations, that this is an escalation he will not accept. She knows that she has just ensured her own removal from whatever comes next. But she also knows that what happens in room for 12 over the next 72 hours will determine whether that boy lives or dies, and that knowledge sits in her chest like a weight that she will carry alone. The rest of her shift passes in a strange calm. She continues her rounds, checks the other patients on her assignment, documents everything with meticulous precision. At 2 o'clock, she takes her break in the staff bathroom, locks the door, and runs cold water over her wrists until her heart rate drops back to normal. She does not cry. She does not call anyone. She sits on the edge of the sink for 5 minutes and breathes, and when she stands up, the woman in the mirror is someone she recognizes, composed, controlled, dangerous in the way that only comes from having survived things that were supposed to kill you. Her shift ends at 4 o'clock. The parking lot is beginning to fill with the arriving night crew, nurses pulling in, residents arriving for their evening rotations, 2 security guards walking the perimeter. This is when Dr. Caldwell chooses to move, when there are maximum witnesses, when the humiliation will be most complete. He is standing near the main entrance with Katie's supervisor, and he is holding a mop. Not pointing to where a mop might be. Actually holding one, the handle still damp from the cleaning supplies, like a man displaying physical evidence. He announces it loudly enough that the nurses parking in the closest spots can hear. Nurse Rodriguez has been reassigned to overnight custodial duty, effective immediately. Insubordination and paranoid attachment to a terminal patient. She'll be more suited to work without direct patient contact. The laundry room needs someone. He hands her the mop like a man passing off a piece of trash that has started to smell. Around them, people look away. A younger nurse shakes her head slightly, and Katie recognizes the expression, pity mixed with relief that it is not her name being called. One of the security guards shifts his weight, uncomfortable, but says nothing. Katie takes the mop. Her hands do not shake. She does not look at Dr. Caldwell, does not acknowledge the humiliation being performed in front of 12 nurses and 3 residents and 2 security officers. Instead, she looks at the mop handle, at the frayed fibers of the head, at the small drops of dirty water that still cling to it, and then she speaks. Her voice is quiet, steady, the voice of someone stating a fact rather than making an accusation. You gave him comfort care measures. You ordered a DNR. You have 0 documentation of a neurological exam. His pupils constricted at 0600 when I tested them with light stimuli. She sets the mop against her hip, and when she meets his eyes, something in her face has changed. The softness is gone. The deferential posture has straightened. There is something in her expression that makes even Dr. Caldwell take a small step back. You missed it, she says. And that's why you're reassigning me. Because I saw something you didn't. She walks toward the hospital entrance, still holding the mop. No one speaks. No one moves. A resident whispers something to an attending. Lieutenant Webb, who has stepped outside to get air while his son sleeps, stands near the doorway with his hands clenched, and he watches this small woman carry a mop past him with the bearing of someone who has carried far heavier things. The night crew arrives. The parking lot fills with the business of shift change. But the moment hangs in the air like something suspended in amber, waiting for what comes next. The night shift custodian slot. That was Katie's new existence at Sacred Heart Hospital as of 0600 the following morning. Dr. Caldwell had been thorough, not loud, not theatrical, but surgical in the way he dismantled her access to the 4th floor. By 0800, every nurse who had stood beside her during morning rounds 3 days ago had been reassigned. Not punished. Not transferred to night shifts or difficult floors. Simply rotated. Chen moved to pediatric oncology. Morrison to the NICU. The quiet ones who'd nodded when Katie mentioned the pupil response, the only neurological spark in a dying child's body, were scattered like ash. Caldwell had done it without meetings, without official memos. Just spoke to the charge nurse, who spoke to staffing, who spoke to the scheduler. The machinery of a hospital moved smoothly when a man with his title pushed. Katie learned this from overhearing conversation in the break room while restocking paper towels. She didn't react. She simply listened, folded the empty box, and moved to the next station. By 1000, the surgery schedule had been altered. The pediatric cardiothoracic specialist who'd been slated to consult on the boy's case, a slim possibility of intervention, nothing more, was reassigned to an emergency appendectomy 2 floors up. The window closed quietly. No announcement. Just gone. By 1200, Katie's electronic access to patient files had been revoked. She tried logging in from a workstation in the break room and saw the message, "Access denied." Administrative override. She stared at the screen for exactly 4 seconds, then logged out and continued her shift. No one was watching. They never were when it came to the custodian. But Caldwell was watching. She knew this because at 14:30, she overheard him in the hallway outside the administrative offices, his voice smooth as silk over a blade. "Yes, Susan. I wanted to flag a personnel concern. One of our nursing staff. The Rodriguez woman. Concerning psychological indicators, frankly. And her credentials, I had IT pull her initial documentation, and there are gaps. Significant gaps. Possibly fraudulent." A pause. His tone shifted, became regretful. "I hate to raise it, but the board should know before we have a liability issue." Another call at 1600. Different voice on the other end, a board member, she guessed. Same architecture? Same poison delivered with the syntax of concern. "I'm worried about her fitness for duty. The way she fixates on impossible cases. The aggression. I've been thinking about bringing in a psychiatric evaluation just to protect the hospital." The third call came at 1745 to someone in human resources. This one was shorter. Pull her full file. Cross-reference her nursing license with the state database. "I'm seeing inconsistencies that trouble me." Katie heard all 3 calls. Not because she was eavesdropping, but because Caldwell made them in his office with the door open, his voice carrying down the hall like he wanted to be sure someone heard. He was building a narrative. Weaving threads. Creating distance between himself and what would come next. She continued mopping. The floor outside his office gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She could see her reflection in the wet tiles, a woman in custodial scrubs, hair pulled back, posture neutral. The reflection of a ghost. At 1900, she clocked out as a nurse and back in as custodial staff. The system had 2 different time codes. 2 different pay grades. 2 different lives, all in the same building. She picked up her supplies from the basement, mop, bucket, disinfectant that smelled like industrial death, and wheeled the cart toward the 4th floor. That's when she saw the security guard posted outside room for 12. He was young, maybe 30, with a blank professional face of someone who'd been given explicit orders and understood the weight of them. His radio was clipped to his belt. His badge read Thompson. He didn't look at her as she approached, but his body language shifted. His hand dropped to his duty belt. A gesture that said without words, "You're not getting past me." Katie slowed the cart. She'd been expecting this. Not hoping for it, but expecting it the way you expect rain in a storm system that's already on the radar. "Cleaning schedule," she said. Her voice was flat. "Custodial." Nothing behind it. She didn't use his name, didn't make eye contact. Just stated fact. "Dr. Caldwell's orders," Thompson said. "No unauthorized personnel in room for 12. That includes custodial." She nodded slowly. Once. Like she understood a language she couldn't speak. Then she moved the cart 10 feet down the hallway, outside the boys' room but with a clear sightline through the window. The glass was observation grade, designed so families and staff could monitor patients from the hallway. She could see him in the bed. His small body under the white sheet. His blind eyes pointed at the ceiling. The monitors around him flashing their quiet numeric warnings, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation declining, heart rhythm becoming more irregular with each passing hour. Nobody was in the room with him. Not at that moment. She mopped. The rhythm was automatic. The sound was repetitive, the wet slap of cotton fibers against linoleum, the squeak of the wringer, the smell of sodium hypochlorite mixing with the antiseptic undertones that lived in every hospital. The sensory numbness of custodial work was a gift. It let her watch without seeming to watch. It let her see everything while appearing to see nothing. At 19:30, Dr. Caldwell entered the room. With him was a man she recognized from the hospital visitor database, tall, with a bearing that spoke of command structure even in civilian clothes. Navy SEAL Lieutenant Marcus Webb. The boy's father. She saw Caldwell's posture shift. He wasn't threatening here. He was performing empathy. A different mask entirely. His hand landed on Webb's shoulder, the gesture of one man comforting another, and she could read his lips from 20 feet away through observation glass, realistic expectations, dignified closure, his suffering. Webb's shoulders curved inward. His head dropped. The shape of a man being told his child was already dead. Caldwell produced a form. DNR. Do not resuscitate. She could see the checkbox that meant let him go. Let him die. Let nature take its course, and let me move to the next case and the next success metric for my quarterly board presentation. Webb took the pen. His hand trembled. Not the trembling of weakness, Katie understood. The trembling of restraint. The trembling of a man who was trained to break bones and move mountains and fly into active fire zones, being forced to use that same control to write his child's death sentence. The pen touched paper. His signature flowed across the form like muscle memory shaped into letters. Katie didn't look away. She mopped. The rhythm continued. Slap, squeeze, swipe. Slap, squeeze, swipe. The sound of institutional routine. The sound of the world continuing. At 2000, she took her dinner break in the laundry room. The employee break room was cheerier, had better lighting, was designed to feel human. She avoided it. She preferred the basement. The industrial washing machines hummed their deep metallic song. The dryers rotated endlessly, tossing hospital linens like they were the only things in the world that still needed care. She opened her personal locker. Inside was a meal ready to eat, an MRE from her field kit, aged maybe 2 years. Beef stew with vegetables. Not because it was good. Because it was the only food her system didn't fight anymore. Everything else was suspect. Everything else could be poisoned or contaminated or sabotaged. But an MRE? An MRE was from a time when she knew exactly how it was processed, exactly what temperature, exactly what hands touched it. She ate slowly, methodically, the way you consumed fuel in a desert. Not tasting. Not enjoying. Just maintaining. On the shelf beside the MRE package was a ballpoint pen. Black, with a military supply company stamp on the side. Below that, a pocket knife. Not tactical. Not special. Just a tool. A thing with edges. She looked at those items the way a musician might look at an instrument they hadn't played in 20 years. The way someone looks at skills they'd been ordered never to use again. At 2300, the code blue alarm screamed from the 4th floor. The sound was a klaxon in the walls. The panic light above room for 12 flashed red. The monitor tone climbed into frequencies that made your hindbrain scream that death was present and hungry and knocking on the door. Katie moved. Not as a custodian. Not with the practiced slowness of someone restocking supplies. She moved like someone whose body had been trained by a military apparatus to react to specific stimuli, and every cell in her structure answered the call. The stairwell was faster than the elevator. 2 steps at a time. Her thighs didn't burn. Her lungs didn't gasp. The muscle memory of 20 years of conditioning was still there, living underneath the scrubs and the fake credentials and the careful erasure of herself. Thompson, the security guard, was gone from his post. Bathroom break. The window into room for 12 was clear. The attending physician, a doctor named Reeves who was competent on paper but frozen in practice, stood at the bedside with his hands at his sides. The boy's face was turning blue. His airway was completely obstructed. Not by foreign body. By swelling. By his own immune system closing down in cascade failure, crushing his trachea from the inside with inflammation that wouldn't stop. No time for intubation. The swelling was too severe. The neck was too small. Standard protocol would fail. Katie pushed past Reeves without speaking. Her hands moved to the boy's neck. She palpated the landmarks. Thyroid cartilage. Cricoid cartilage. The membrane between them. The space that stayed open when everything else closed down. Her left hand found the pocket knife in her scrub pocket. She didn't remember putting it there. It had been in her locker. Somehow it was now in her hand. Her brain wasn't following those sequence steps anymore. She was operating on something deeper. Something that existed below conscious thought. The knife blade was small. Medical grade would have been better. This would work. It would have to work. The ballpoint pen came from her other pocket. Again, she didn't remember the decision to retrieve it. Just suddenly it was there, an airway tube, a conduit for oxygen, a thing that might keep a child alive in the 3 minutes before a proper tracheostomy team could assemble. She worked. The blade made a small incision through skin and membrane. The body's response was immediate, bleeding, but manageable. The pen's hollow shaft slid into the opening. Oxygen could now pass. The boy's lungs could still draw breath, even if his throat was swollen closed. "Call respiratory," she said. Not to Reeves. He wasn't there anymore. He'd backed away from the bed, giving her space. She said it to the code team arriving through the door, their crash cart rolling like a machine of salvation that had come too late and too early at the same time. "Emergency cricothyrotomy," she stated, her voice steady. "Temporary airway. He needs immediate definitive management. Call OR. Get the pediatric ENT attending. Now." The senior resident nodded. Didn't question. Didn't hesitate. Just moved. The room transformed into controlled chaos. For lines, medications, monitors being recalibrated. The boy's oxygen saturation climbing from the low 60s upward. 70. 75. 80. Katie stepped back. Her hand was bleeding where the knife had slipped. She didn't look at it. She was already reaching for the MRE package in her other pocket. She pulled out a metallic-coated emergency blanket, the kind designed for field trauma. One component of a combat lifesavers kit. She tore it open, folded it into a small square, taped it across the knife wound on the boy's chest with medical tape from the crash cart. A makeshift chest seal. Not perfect. But it would hold until they reached the operating room. It would hold until the child got proper care in a proper theater where the swelling could be managed and the airway could be secured and an 8-year-old blind Navy SEAL's son could maybe, possibly, have another day. The senior resident was on the phone with surgery. "We're moving now." 3 minutes. Katie's hand steadied. The boy's oxygen was now 92%. His heart rhythm was stabilizing. He was alive because her training had activated. Because the things they'd tried to bury had clawed their way back to the surface. Because sometimes the quiet person in the room was the only one who knew how to stop the world from ending. She looked up. Dr. Caldwell was standing in the doorway, his face the color of old marble, his mouth open like he wanted to speak but no words existed in any language that could describe what he'd just witnessed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that every person in that room had seen exactly what she could do, and there was no erasing that knowledge now. There was no going back to the fiction. The mask had cracked, and underneath it was something that terrified him more than any lawsuit or credential fraud investigation ever could. A woman who moved like muscle memory made flesh. A woman who saved lives with a pen and a pocket knife and knowledge that should never have been in her hands. Katie stepped back from the bed and removed her gloves. One pair. Then another pair underneath, still clean. She disposed of the outer pair in the red biohazard bin and left the room without speaking. Thompson was standing in the hallway now, confusion written across his face. She walked past him, down the stairs, back to the basement, to her locker where the MRE package was empty and the knife was clean and the ballpoint pen had one less cap. She sat on the bench in the laundry room. The industrial washing machines continued their rhythm. The dryers rotated. The world above kept moving forward, but down here in the basement, in the part of the hospital where no one important ever went, the quiet operative folded her hands and waited for what came next. The machine screamed at 0200. The monitors in room for 12 shifted from their steady dialogue into panic, the heart rate climbing, the oxygen saturation plummeting, the boy's small chest heaving against the ventilator that was supposed to be keeping him alive. Dr. Harrison, the attending physician on night shift, stood frozen in the doorway, his tablet still in his hand, his mouth open but no words coming out. 3 years of pediatric critical care and suddenly he was made of stone. Katie heard it from the basement laundry room, 3 floors below, through the hospital's open intercom system. The code announcement was clinical, pediatric distress, room for 12, attending to patient now. But she knew that voice. She knew that hesitation in Dr. Harrison's tone. She'd heard it before, in different deserts, different languages, different wars, the sound of a good man watching a child die and not knowing how to stop it. Her hands were already moving before her mind caught up. She dropped the folded scrubs. She was up the back stairwell in 20 seconds, muscle memory burning through her legs like diesel fuel, her footfall silent on the concrete steps, not running, not yet, but moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had done this exact calculation 1,000 times before. Room for 12 was chaos wearing a hospital uniform. The boy was arching against the ventilator tubing, his small lips blue-gray, his blind eyes wide open as if he could see the death coming for him. Dr. Harrison was calling for the crash cart. A resident was fumbling with an intubation kit. The night nurse was squeezing the manual ventilation bag, but the boy's lungs weren't taking it, his chest wasn't rising, the air going nowhere because somewhere between his mouth and his lungs, his airway had completely collapsed. Pneumothorax. Maybe a foreign body. Maybe the tumor had shifted. Didn't matter. Nothing mattered except that in 4 minutes, this child would be brain dead, and in 6 minutes, he would be dead, and Katie had exactly enough time to split the difference. She didn't announce herself. She simply stepped forward and held out her hand. "Give me a 14-gauge needle and the longest one you have." Dr. Harrison stared at her. "Ms. Rodriguez, you're not." She moved anyway. The crash cart was 2 feet away. She found the emergency cricothyrotomy kit with the precision of muscle memory, hands that remembered different wars, different children, different hospital corridors where she'd done this with equipment that was 1,000 times worse. She had a ballpoint pen in her pocket. She had a pocket knife with a 3-inch blade. She had 45 seconds. The boy's neck was thin, almost translucent in the fluorescent light. Katie palpated the cricothyroid membrane, that hollow space between the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid, the one place you could punch an airway through without hitting major vessels if you knew exactly where you were going. She did. She'd done it 17 times before. Never on a child this small. Never with this much at stake. "Hold him still," she said to the resident, and her voice had changed, lower, not a request, a command in the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed. The resident obeyed. She steadied the boy's neck with her left hand, fingers on either side of his trachea, feeling the small cartilage rings beneath the skin. The ballpoint pen was already in her right hand. She'd clicked the ink cartridge out 2 years ago and kept it in her pocket for exactly this moment, for exactly this scenario that she'd prayed would never happen and had prepared for anyway because preparation was faith and faith was the only thing that worked when everything else was burning. The needle went through the membrane at a 45-degree angle. She felt it pop through, a sensation like ice cracking, then she was pulling the needle back and sliding the thin plastic catheter home. The boy gasped. The ventilator tube was still in his mouth but now air was flowing around the blockage, into his lungs, oxygen saturation climbing from 68 to 72 to 78. The heart monitor settled into something almost resembling normal rhythm. 30 seconds. That was all it took to buy time. But a needle catheter was a temporary fix for maybe 2 hours if he was lucky. After that, the swelling would make it useless, or the catheter would kink, or infection would take over. Katie was already moving to the next problem. The boy's right side was hyperinflated, his chest asymmetrical. Tension pneumothorax. The collapsed lung was pressing against his heart. She found the MRE packet in her locker that she'd kept since 2004, the flameless heater package she'd never opened, never trusted, the one thing she owned that still smelled like desert and dust. She opened her pocket knife to the blade and cut the corner off the MRE foil, 3 inches of aluminum plastic laminate, and sealed it over the boy's right anterior chest wall at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, exactly where the air was escaping from the pleural cavity. 3 pieces of surgical tape and the seal was airtight. The oxygen sat climbed to 84, then 88, then 91. By 02:15, the boy was stable. The heart rhythm was sinus, steady, the kind of rhythm that meant a child could live to see morning. Lieutenant Webb was crying in the corner, his prosthetic leg trembling as he gripped the bed rail, his voice breaking in a way that 6 Taurs and 2 Purple Hearts had never quite managed to break it before. He's alive. Oh God, he's alive. Katie stepped back from the bed. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Her face showed nothing. She'd just performed 2 procedures that no civilian nurse had training for, in front of witnesses, and she didn't flinch. She simply cleaned up the debris, disposed of the used catheter, and was about to walk out of the room when Dr. Caldwell arrived. He stood in the doorway at 0230, still in his evening clothes, his hair slightly mussed, clearly called in from home by the attending. His eyes swept across the room, the boy who was breathing, the monitors showing stable vitals, the wound seal on the boy's chest with its precise 3-piece tape application, and his face underwent a transformation that Katie watched with clinical detachment. First white. Then red. Then something worse than either. How did you? He stopped. His jaw clenched. Dr. Harrison, who performed these interventions. The attending was pale. I? Ms. Rodriguez. But Dr. Caldwell, I was frozen, I don't know what happened, the boy crashed an. Clear the room, Caldwell said. Everyone except Rodriguez. They left. Katie remained, her hands folded in front of her, her posture perfect, her face a blank slate. Dr. Caldwell closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was very loud. What you did, he said quietly, is practicing medicine without a license. 2 criminal felonies. You performed an emergency surgical airway and a chest decompression with improvised equipment. The child was dying, Katie said. I don't care if God himself was dying. You are a nurse. You followed someone else's orders, or you called a code, or you waited for actual medical personnel. You did not, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to something serpentine, perform unauthorized procedures on a pediatric patient. Do you understand what this means for your employment? Katie looked at him. She didn't respond. 6 hours, he said. That's all you've bought yourself. 6 hours of not calling security, of pretending this didn't happen, and then we resume the DNR conversation that should have happened 24 hours ago. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will not just fire you. I will ensure you are prosecuted. I will call the Virginia State Board of Nursing personally. I will make sure every hospital in this region blacklists you before breakfast. He left. Katie stood alone in the room with Lieutenant Webb's child, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, feeling something inside her that had been sealed for 20 years beginning to crack open like thin ice. The next 6 hours moved like slow-motion footage of a car crash. By 0600, every nurse who had been in room for 12 during the save was receiving transfer notices to different facilities. Sarah Chen, the night shift charge nurse who had witnessed everything, was being moved to the satellite clinic in Virginia Beach effective immediately. Marcus, the resident, was being reassigned to the Richmond campus. New protocols appeared in the system, all of Katie's electronic access to patient files was revoked. Her badge was reprogrammed to show custodial staff with no clinical privileges. A new schedule appeared assigning her exclusively to basement maintenance and janitorial duties on the night shift. Dr. Caldwell made his calls methodically, his voice smooth as surgical silk. Patricia, I wanted to update you on that staff concern I mentioned. Yes, the credential issue, it's escalated significantly, actually performed unauthorized medical interventions this evening. I have witnesses. No, I'm handling it through proper channels, but you should know we may face liability if this comes out. By 1800, 2 security officers appeared at the hospital laundry room where Katie had returned to folding sheets, the same metal tables where she'd folded body bags in a field hospital 2 decades ago. Ms. Rodriguez, you need to come with us, they said, not unkindly, but firmly. They walked her through the main lobby of Sacred Heart Hospital. Nurses stared. Residents whispered. A visitor froze mid-sip of her coffee. Katie's face remained blank, her spine straight, her hands at her sides. The badge, 3 years of work, 3 years of rebuilding a life from ashes, was taken at the security desk and cut in half with scissors. The metal cutter made a sound like a gunshot in the quiet office. Dr. Caldwell watched from the administrative balcony, his expression satisfied. At dawn the next day, Katie returned to the hospital laundry. Not through the main entrance, that would trigger the motion sensors and alert the night security team. She used the service entrance on the loading dock, the one that only maintenance staff knew about. The basement was silent, just the rumble of industrial washers and the hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects. She found her folded hospital scrubs still stacked on the metal table where she'd left them. 3 years of them. 3 years of work, of transformation, of becoming someone other than Major Catherine Rodriguez. She picked them up and began folding them again, creating neat rectangles the way she'd been taught in basic training, the way she'd done it in field hospitals in Helmand Province 20 years ago, the way muscle memory never quite forgets. The hospital ID badge she'd worn for 3 years lay on top of the stack like a headstone. She placed it gently on top of the final fold. Then she waited. She placed it gently on top of the final fold. Then she waited. The next morning came without mercy. Katie's hands moved through the laundry room on autopilot, sorting, folding, the rhythm of muscle memory that required nothing from her mind. The scrubs were gone. The badge was gone. The boy was still alive because of her, and the price of that survival was the erasure of everything she'd built in this place. She'd made peace with that equation the moment she'd pulled a 14-gauge needle from her emergency kit and pressed it through the cricothyroid membrane. The choice had been made the second she saw those pupils respond to light. By 1400 the next day, the hospital lobby was moving in its normal rhythm, visitors checking in, staff moving between floors, the soft beep of badge readers at the security gate. Katie had returned only to inventory what she'd lost, to walk the hallways one final time as a ghost. She stood near the main entrance, watching the elevator banks, when the administrative wing doors, the ones marked authorized personnel only, burst open with enough force to turn heads. A 17-year-old boy moved through that lobby like he was carrying something heavier than his own weight. Dark eyes, her eyes, set in a face that had inherited her jawline and her complete disregard for authority. Daniel. Her son. He held a broken dog tag chain in one fist, tarnished silver, scratched from 20 years of being worn next to a child's skin, and in his other hand, a shadow box of medals. The sunlight caught the ribbons, blue and white, crimson and gold, the colors of recognition the world would never know to give her. The lobby went quiet. Not the soft quiet of normal afternoon fade. The complete silence of 40 people watching something they didn't understand unfold in front of them. Mom. Daniel's voice carried the control she'd taught him, but underneath it was the tremor of a teenager who'd opened an attic box and found his mother's real life staring back at him. They need to see these. Katie's breath held. Her hands, steady as surgical steel, trembled for the first time in 3 days. The lobby doors opened again. Lieutenant Marcus Webb entered on a prosthetic that moved with the fluid precision of a man who'd learned to walk through pain that had no measurement scale. He was thinner than his military photo, his dress uniform hanging off a frame that had been rebuilt piece by piece. His left eye tracked the room with the methodical assessment of a man trained to read threat signatures in crowded spaces. When he saw Katie, something in his face shifted, recognition not of a face but of a presence. Of a ghost who'd saved him twice. That's Major Katie Rodriguez. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded men in places where hesitation meant death. Not a question. A statement. A truth being declared in front of a hospital that had spent 20 years calling her just a nurse. A pediatric nurse named Sarah Chen, one of the few who'd witnessed the cricothyrotomy before Caldwell reassigned her, stepped forward with trembling hands. She took the shadow box from Daniel and opened it, her eyes moving across the medals with the reverence of someone who understood that each one represented lives held together by hands that should not have been there, by training that should not have existed in a civilian hospital. She began reading the citations aloud, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was speaking into the silence. Silver Star. Helmand Province. Exceptional valor under hostile fire. Saved 14 lives including 1 civilian infant during FOB overrun. Her voice cracked. She steadied it. Bronze Star with valor. 2 Purple Hearts. Distinguished Service Cross for actions that turned the tide when our forward operating base was surrounded. She looked up from the box, meeting Katie's eyes. That's you. That's all you. The SEAL team commander who'd flown in from Virginia Beach 16 hours earlier, summoned by a call from Lieutenant Webb that had said only she's here, stepped into formation beside his commander. His voice became the measured tone of ceremony, the precision of someone reading names at a memorial. Bronze Star with valor. Silver Star for actions above and beyond the call of duty. Helmand Province, 2004. 14 lives saved. One of them became my son. He gestured toward room for 12, for floors above. He paused. The child she saved carried her dog tag. He kept it his entire life. Didn't know her name. Just knew he needed to find her. The lobby was not silent anymore. The silence had transformed into something else, the sound of 40 people understanding they had been standing next to a legend and calling her a rookie. 2 FBI agents entered through the main doors at 1,700 hours. They moved with the deliberate pace of people who'd been briefed on exactly what they were walking into and understood the significance of the moment. Behind them came James Park, the Marine Corps veteran who worked in IT, carrying a laptop and a thumb drive like a soldier carrying classified intelligence into a war room. The agents went directly to the administrative wing. Board members were assembled. Caldwell was present. What happened in that boardroom took exactly 47 minutes from start to finish. James Park opened the laptop. Played the security footage. Timestamp 0300, the night after Katie's firing. Caldwell's hands moving through the electronic medical record. The cursor clicking. Notes being altered. Chart entries being fabricated to show decline that hadn't happened. Then, 3 days before that, falsified Medicare death projections filed under the boy's name. Federal documentation stating inevitable mortality. The paper trail of a man who decided a child's life was worth less than the metrics he reported to the board. Patricia Hendricks, the board chair Caldwell had called repeatedly with concerns about Katie's psychological stability, her credential gaps, her obvious unsuitability for patient care, stood and walked to the door. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her leaving the room was a statement. Caldwell tried to explain about the employment gaps, the missing years, the inconsistencies in Katie's file. James Park interrupted him with a voice like a tank idling in a garage. Those gaps are classified. Operation Silent Shepherd was a Black Ops extraction. She was ordered to disappear. That's not fraud. That's national security. The FBI agents placed the cuffs on Caldwell at 1703. They read him his rights while he stared at the door of the boardroom, at the hallway beyond where Katie stood watching him with eyes that had seen worse things than this and would survive better. When they walked him past her, Caldwell's face was the color of a man experiencing catastrophic failure in real time. His hands shook inside the cuffs. His medical license was suspended by 1900 hours. His office was cleared by 2100. The hospital appointed an interim chief of pediatrics by midnight, a woman from Johns Hopkins who understood that children were worth saving even when the insurance paperwork was complicated. 6 months later, room for 12 was filled with afternoon sunlight that turned the walls the color of honey. The blind 8-year-old boy, sight restored by a specialist from Johns Hopkins who'd read Katie's story in the Navy Times and volunteered her skill as a gift, sat up in bed with wonder written across his small face. Clear eyes. Light entering where darkness had lived his entire life. He was tracing his fingers over the dog tag on a broken chain around his neck, the metal worn smooth by 2 decades of fingers before his. Katie stood beside the bed in her reinstated position as head of pediatric trauma. Her uniform was pressed. Her rank insignia, Major, was visible on her collar for the first time in 20 years. Lieutenant Webb stood on her other side, his prosthetic leg steady, his salute precise and formal. She returned it without hesitation. The hospital had renamed the Pediatric Trauma Wing after Operation Silent Shepherd. A bronze plaque hung in the entrance hallway, in recognition of Major Catherine Rodriguez, United States Army Medical Corps, because courage doesn't always carry a weapon. Daniel visited after school, wearing his mother's shadow box medals for a history presentation. He stood beside her at the window of room for 12, watching his half-brother, the child his mother had saved in Helmand, the child she was saving again, trace the dog tag that connected them across 20 years and an ocean. For floors below, in the parking garage, Dr. Caldwell began his night shift as a security guard. His uniform was ill-fitting, bought at a discount retailer, the fabric cheap against skin that had once worn tailored suits. He checked badges of nurses who passed him without looking up. Sarah Chen, returned from Virginia Beach, back on pediatrics. Marcus Webb's ex-wife, who'd taken the promotion to director of nursing. Each of them had walked past him without recognition, not out of cruelty but out of something worse, the complete absence of anything worth remembering. Katie turned from the window. The boy looked up at her with clear eyes for the first time, seeing the woman who'd saved him twice, once in the desert with hands that knew how to hold lives together, and once in this hospital with a calm that refused to break. She reached out and tucked the dog tag gently back inside his hospital gown, where it would rest against his heart. "Hello," she said, and the word carried the weight of 20 years finally coming home. The closing shot would show the memorial wall, that bronze plaque catching light. Then 4 floors below, a small figure in a parking garage booth, checking badges of people who would never know his name. The distance between them measured in more than just floors. The difference between someone who'd spent their life building and someone who'd spent their life taking. The difference between a hero who pushed a mop and a man who'd pushed a child toward death for quarterly metrics. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. If this story moved you, if you believe that quiet people often carry the heaviest loads, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Like this video and comment, what would you have done in Katie's position? Should someone like Caldwell have faced consequences beyond losing his job? And if you know someone working in medicine or the military who deserves to have their story told, tell us in the comments below. We're listening.